You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. And of course, each week we bring you important and useful information facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I can't thank everybody enough for all their support. Our listeners keep growing each and every day organically. Many of you, share these podcasts with friends and family, and I just really want to thank you for that. If you don't know, you can listen to the show on a lot of different ways. A lot of different ways. Ooh, sorry about that. A little technical issue here. All right. Okay. Anyway, you could listen to the show a lot of different ways. Certainly, our website, boomerstodayradio.com. We also have a free app, Boomers Today. You could download it on your iPhone or Android phone. You can listen to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, a lot of different ways you can listen to it. And a lot of comments we get from our listeners saying, hey, they're going on their walk in the morning or their bike ride and putting on their headphones and listening. So a lot of different ways you can listen. So thank you so much for all your support. And I think we're getting so many listeners because we have great guests, and today's not going to be any different. We have with us Richard Haiduck. Richard, following an executive career in life sciences, he's had an active retirement. His interests include cycling, hiking, volunteering, reading, and family. He has recently interviewed over 75 retirees as a basis for his recent book called Shifting Gears. 50 baby boomers share their meaningful journeys in retirement. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today.
Well, thank you, Frank. I'm delighted to be on the show. And I think the stories about people dealing with retirement may be a really nice fit to the audience that you've attracted over the years.
Yes. And I want to make sure, I should have asked you before, and did I pronounce your last name correctly? Is it Haiduck?
Perfectly right.
All right, good. I got it right then. Good. I don't like to botch people's names. So great. So, we had a chance to talk briefly before starting the interview here. And I mentioned to you that I've written a book, and, I'm always interested to hear from people who've written books, kind of what was the catalyst. Tell us about that. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what led into it.
Well, it's really a two-part story about how I got into the book. When I was 7 years old, I always wanted to be an author. And every day I would write a story. It was never longer than a page, and it was always some sci-fi fiction fantasy thing. And then I stopped. And for 65 years, I didn't do another bit of writing for an audience like that. Then I ran into one of my buddies, and he was telling me, he says, I've never told you this story, Richard, but I was in the Senior Olympics. And I said, Dave, I've known you for years. You never mentioned that. He says, well, I was kind of humble about it. He went on to tell this amazing story about the experience he had. And then a couple other times over the next couple of weeks, I had a similar experience where someone told me an amazing story about how they were getting sense of purpose in their retirement, how they're getting joy in their retirement. And I woke up one day and I said, those stories need to be told, and I'm in an ideal position to gather that information and put it together into a book.
That's great. That's wonderful. And we'll, shortly we'll let everybody know how they can get the book. But when, I'm just curious, when you interviewed people, I do this certainly not for my living, but for my passion. I interview people all the time, as I am right now. So I give you a lot of credit for doing what you did. Did you find any, consistency in the stories, or were they quite diversified as you interviewed these people?
I would say they were very diverse, in part because there was a natural diversity, and in part because I was seeking out a range of experiences. I didn't want to have duplicates in the book. So I would seek out people who had done something, maybe in a volunteer capacity, maybe in a part-time work kind of capacity, maybe in a new leisure activity. But each story is different. But what was amazing, and Frank, you'll appreciate this especially, people really opened up. They put their heart and soul into the interview with their candor, with their saying, and here's how I felt about what I was doing. One of the ladies that I interviewed early had gone through some physical adversity. She'd had 2 hip replacements, 2 knee replacements over a period of 3 years. She had 4 different surgeries. She was on a cane for 3 years. And she said, at the end of that, I knew I was in the best shape I was ever going to be. I had all new parts. I wanted to do something really physically challenging to prove something to myself and the people around me. And so she and her boyfriend decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa, 19,000 feet, a 6-day climb. And her girlfriend said to her, Donna, you're crazy. You couldn't have done that when you were 20 years old. And she said, you don't understand. I'm doing this. She said, I've been through a really tough patch and I'm going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I won't give away the end of the story, but it was an example of someone who said, I'm going to take this time, this stage of my life, and I'm going to do something that I never would have imagined doing. And she's just an amazing, gritty lady who took on a really big challenge.
So do you think there's been a change in thinking of the age that someone, quote, retires? I mean, with Social Security years ago that was implemented, generally speaking, you could start taking Social Security at 65. Businesses, was like, hey, it's time. You're going to get your watch and you're out of here at 65. Is there a change, or is that still the thinking?
I found kind of 2 different ways in which people dealt with that transition. And I would say one was pretty successful and one not so successful. For some people, there was an abrupt change. One day they were working, the next day they were retired. And sometimes they got laid off or their company closed down, and it was a complete surprise to them. In other cases, they just hit age 65 and hadn't planned a retirement. And those people, this is a bit of a generality, but it applies pretty broadly to the people I interviewed. If this was an abrupt change, it took them about a year to sort it out and get something that they felt good about going forward, some sense of purpose, some activity that was joyful for them. There were other people who had a time of transition. In my own case, I had a consulting business and I decided I wanted to wind it down while I wound up my retirement. So over a 5-year period, each year I would do 1 less client and I would do 1 new retirement activity. And so I got to put my toe in the water. I got to try out some things. I got to do trial and error. I got to fail at some things that I tried in retirement, things that I said, I thought this would be fun, but it wasn't. Other things that were terrific and that I really enjoyed. The people who did that, who were able to do that sort of transition into retirement, had a much easier time of it. They never lost their sense of self-worth. They never lost an ability to fill the day with interesting things. There's always this threat of, what am I going to do all day? I think people who ease into retirement find there's plenty of things to do, but finding them may take a little while.
Do you think, and we'll get into some of the stories in a little bit, but do you think that the, quote, definition of retirement has changed?
Oh, I had a whole bunch of people, Frank, who said, I just don't buy that word. I'm not retiring. I'm just changing to something different. retirement suggests sitting on a rocking chair on your porch and watching life go by. And the people I interviewed, there were a couple like that, but a whole bunch of them who said, no, I'm going to go on and do something interesting that I've always wanted to do.
So, and I know you interviewed several people, but would you say that most of them were still going to be working in some capacity, maybe not at the same pace, or most people thinking, hey, that's it. I'm going to start golfing and hiking and playing an instrument and no more work, or are they kind of easing into it?
Yeah, I think there were some people who found retirement work to be, and that was something different than what they did during their working career. One guy, it was a funny story. He had been successful in the insurance business, and when he retired, he said, I got to keep my hand in doing something. It won't hurt to top up the income a little bit so we can take a nice vacation. And so he decided to drive Uber. And I thought, well, that sounds like kind of a boring story, but I'll listen to what he has to say. And he said, Richard, I love to tell jokes. And I said, yeah. He said, in Uber, the person sits in your back seat, you tell them a joke, and they either laugh or they ignore you, but you have an interaction and you tell this joke. And he said, but then you drop them off, and the next thing you pick up another passenger, and you get to tell the same joke over again. And he says, by the end of the day, I've perfected that joke. I've told it 20 times. And if I haven't gotten it right, it's shame on me for not learning. But he said that personal interaction was an important addition to his retirement. And the fact that he was making a few bucks along the way was kind of a secondary issue for him.
Yeah. Any stories you could share, like just shocking ones, just kind of even made you go, whoa? Anybody come to mind?
Yeah, one guy, this was a remarkable experience. He was actually a gay guy, and he split up with his husband of many years, 18 years, and came as a complete shock to him. And at virtually the same time, he had macular degeneration and started losing his sight. So now he's lost his emotional connection to his partner. He's losing his vision. And he said it's the lowest he's ever been in his life. And for him, there was a spiritual solution. He discovered a new spirituality inside himself to say, how do I deal with this? And he came up with some ways in which his sense of self changed to deal with his situation. And when I interviewed him, he said, this was a difficult story to tell, but I wanted people to know I made it through, and I'm now on the other side of it. I'm in my 70s. I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. And I thought, what an amazing story. And I really felt grateful that he was willing to share that very personal story.
That's great. That is a great story. Well, what about anybody else that you'd like to address? Maybe someone who's really more diversified in their interests in retirement that you'd like to share.
But one guy, a guy named Chuck, had been a career diplomat. He'd lived all over the world in Africa and the Far East. And he was offered an early retirement package at age 50. And he said, I enjoyed being a diplomat. There's a whole set of things that you do, a whole set of interactions that you have. It's great fun. But I wanted to do something reinventing myself. He said, I thought I could probably run a business. He had always been a bird watcher and had been really interested in that. And he'd spent a lot of time in Africa on assignment. So he'd done a lot of bird watching in Africa, had a whole network of people that he knew. So he said, I'll start a bird watching business. And he says it required some reinvention. It required some looking at things in a different way. Running a P&L business, as you know, has its own set of challenge, and that's quite a bit different than being a diplomat. So he ran this birding business, made a reasonable success out of it, and then woke up one morning and he said, I'm working way too hard. These customers are driving me crazy. They're very high maintenance. People traveling to Africa for the first time have a set of insecurities that the tour organizer has to deal with. He said, so I stopped doing that, and I decided to reinvent myself a second time. And I said, well, that's great. How did you do that? He said, I've always had an interest in the outdoors. I started a nonprofit in Colorado to provide services to the Forest Service as all of the rangers were getting laid off through budget cuts and all that sort of thing. A lot of the services of the parks had disappeared. So he took one of those large parks in Colorado and formed a volunteer organization to take on that task of providing services to the visitors to the park.
That's
So this is
fantastic. Yeah.
you can imagine what he went through and how he had to reset himself at a stage later in his life to say reinventing me is important.
Yeah. It just reminds me, actually, a good friend of mine who I play some golf with. We go hikes together. He's retired. I'm still working, of course, but and his previous, his career, he was a lobbyist. It was all very fast paced. And, I mean, you can imagine that type of a position. And it doesn't matter if we're golfing or hiking, all of a sudden there's some bird flying and he stops and he goes, you know what that is? And he starts giving me kind of the history of the bird. I'm going, who are you? I mean,
I thought you were a lobbyist.
Yeah, right. And I said, where did you learn? When did you start getting into this? He goes, just recently. It's interesting how you have different backgrounds of people and kind of what happens. I guess it's just very interesting. It's great.
Yeah, another guy who comes to mind is a guy named Steve, who is actually based in the UK. And Steve said, I want my retirement to be different than my work. He said, my work I would describe as all left brain work. He worked for IBM. He was analytical. He was very data driven, very objective. And he said, I've spent my whole working career without using my right brain. I want to have a right brain retirement. I want to exercise the creative side of me. And he's very conscious about it, very organized to say, what are the right brain activities I'd like to do? So with some help from his wife, he started doing some painting. And he put some of his artwork on Facebook, and he got a lot of people, giving him likes. And he said, I guess it's not so bad. He then, through a longer story, ended up having a show of his paintings. And he sold about $1,500 worth of stuff. And he said, I guess people must like my work. I guess my right brain does work. He then went on to be a solo singer in some bars. He actually went to Greece and started singing in a bar there, and was having a great time. Again, exercising the right brain part of his activities.
That's great. That's great. Well, Rich, we're going to take a real quick break. I promise you. We'll be right back, and then we'll have some. I'm sure you'll have some more stories to tell us. But I also like to talk about kind of more people preparing them for retirement, how to prepare, and not just financially. I'm talking about is more mentally and getting ready. So we'll come back and we'll talk about that. So I want to. I guess I just wanted to ask everybody: Are you concerned about an older driver and maybe the safety of that older driver? Well, Beyond Driving with Dignity is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or you could call 877-907-8841 to connect with an advisor in your area. Again, that's www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or call 877-907-8841 to connect with an advisor in your area. We're back with Richard Haiduck, who's author of the book, Shifting Gears, 50 Baby Boomers Share Their Meaningful Journeys in Retirement. So, maybe we'll go right to the point, and maybe we'll finish up with a couple more stories, Richard. But what advice would you have for listeners who may be in that period where they're thinking, all right, am I ready for retirement? What's my life going to be like? They're kind of just thinking about the possibility. It's approaching. Any words of wisdom there?
Yeah, and this is not so much my wisdom as a synthesis of the wisdom I heard from others. I think one thing that works is to put your toe in the water, put your toe in the retirement water, start trying some things that you think will be good retirement activities. I think a second principle is you have earned the right to have freedom in retirement. Trial and error is way different than in your career. In your career, you couldn't kind of quit 4 jobs in a year if you wanted to keep having a career. In retirement, one of the guys was looking for some volunteer activities. And he said, I didn't know what was right, but the only way I could figure it out was to try it. So he would volunteer to do something. He would work at it for a while, and then he'd sit down with his boss and say, this is working or it isn't. But within a year, he went through 4 different ones. So I think that trial and error part. And then I think this perhaps sounds a little funny, but I think it's a time when it's okay to be selfish. Do what you want. That might be giving back. That might be something that's volunteering or charitable or whatever, but it might be something as simple as going fishing every day. You've earned the right to select that. And there's no right or wrong answer except for it fitting with your own priorities and your own interests and your own things that you want to do in this stage of life.
So I meant to ask you right after the break, so I'll ask you now, or just let our listeners know how they can get your book, or if you have a website they can go to, anything you'd like to share.
Yes, so the book is called Shifting Gears, 50 Baby Boomers Share Their Meaningful Journeys in Retirement. It's, of course, available on Amazon and with other booksellers. We've just recently launched an audiobook with the collaboration of a guy named Bruce Kramer, and that's now also on the Amazon site. And some of these stories, I got to admit, when the written word is on the page, it tells a certain story. When it's an audiobook with all the expression that Bruce brings into it, he has one story about a marathoner that is just barely making it to the finish line. And you can just feel the pain in the voice that he's presenting. So the other, it's kind of a rambling answer to a simple question.
No, that's great. That's great. I love Audible book. I mean, well, I don't know I think Amazon owns Audible. Maybe it's on Audible, or is it?
Yes,
separate?
It's on Audible.
Yeah.
It's on iTunes and others. I also have a website, richardhaiduck.com, and actually this podcast will be posted there within a few days as well.
Great. So that's Richard Haiduck, spelled HAIDUCK.com.
Correct. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. So we've got, we really just have a couple minutes left. So maybe you could finish up with just any of the people that you interviewed that you'd like to highlight right now.
Bruce and Jill are doing something really amazing. They teach Buddhist meditation anger management in
Wow.
a maximum security prison.
Oh my God. That's wild. Oh my
And
God.
what they said was, we want to help, and we're willing to have a lot of bad days along the way. And, their story is, here's a bad day, here's something horrible that happened, here's something horrible that happened, and then here's a breakthrough. And the guts that they have to do this once a week, and they've been doing it for several years, and the impact that they're having on some really tough prisoners. It's a maximum security prison. It's just an amazing story, an amazing dedication, and an amazing sense of purpose by them for doing this in their retirement years.
That is an amazing one. So, boy, there's got to be we've only touched on a few. So, Richard Haiduck, thank you so much for joining us. Check it out. Shifting Gears, 50 Baby Boomers Share Their Meaningful Journeys in Retirement. You can go to his website at richardhayduck.com or pick it up on Amazon or Audible. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's been a great interview. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And everybody, please be safe out there. And we'll talk to everybody next week. Thank you very much for joining us.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.